Okay, so before we start on today's lesson, just recapping a little bit from last week. So all I want you to do on a piece of paper, sorry, you can use a book to help you with this, is draw this square with 4 boxes inside it, and then each of these boxes are one of the chambers. So I want you to have a go at labelling the 4 valves, the 4 chambers, and you'll have to draw the 4 blood vessels. So have a look where the blood vessels go into, what chamber they come out from. So Sarah, if you go to page, I've got paper in the middle there if you haven't got paper. Can you read it? So on page, if I can find the heart. Sarah, if you have a look on page 24. On the heart, it's got 4 chambers, and sometimes it's shown as a square like this. This is chamber 1, chamber 2, chamber 3, and chamber 4. So we've got like the right atrium and the left atrium, and we've got the right ventricle and the left ventricle. So that would be in our 4 squares. So when we think of the heart, although this is looking at it on the left side, do you notice whether it be done any times you don't know?
Do you have to write down what it is, or are we just drawing it?
Drawing it, and so write down, label it at the same time, sorry. So although we look on the left side, we have to imagine that heart's inside us. So then actually it's the right side, so it's backwards. So this side is the right side and this side is the left side. So this one, the top square here, would be the right atrium, and this one would be the right ventricle, and the left atrium and the left ventricle. So if I get you just to draw a square, and first just label the chambers, and then I'll help you draw it.
Wait, so the right atrium would be the top one?
Yeah, and the right ventricle, the bottom one. So A comes before V, so atriums, ventricles.
So what was it? It was tricuspid.
PID. So TRICUSPID. Tricuspid.
Is the other one tricuspid though? No. Bicuspid.
No, both the same, bicuspid. I've been nice, I've labelled the dividing bit for you. Giving you one thing. Perfect. This one's the right atrium. The bottom one's called ventricles, so this will be the right ventricle. Yeah, and then exactly the same left on that side. Then we've got 2 valves, which are like doors, which separate the ventricles. And we've got the tricuspid on this side and the bicuspid on this side. And the way that we remember is to try something on before you buy it. So try and then buy. So if I steal your pencil quickly, I'll just show you when you're drawing valves, so it's like 2 doors. So there's a valve there and there's a valve there. So this one is the tricuspid, which is just here. The tricuspid valve. You can see here it's, where is it? Here. So like the doorway to go from here to here. And then on this side again, to separate these 2 chambers is the bicuspid valve. Give you 1 more minute. Is that long enough?
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a piece of art.
Wait, so which one is it?
So this one is the tricuspid, because we always try before we buy something. So it's TRICUSPID. that's the main bits of the heart. Now all we need to add is the veins and arteries. So the blood will come into this atrium, go down here, it will then go to the lungs, and then come up to down, and then go out the body. Yeah, pretty much. And then it goes to the lungs in between that, but they're the direct order it goes to the chambers.
1, 2, and then 1, 2.
Yeah, 3, 4. And then if I steal your pencil, the blood enters in this one, like we just said, is one. So the vena cava, which is the main vein, comes in from 2 ways. So it goes down here, up here. So blood from above the heart comes from this one, and blood from below the heart comes from this one. And this is called the inferior, which is lower, vena cava, which is the vein. And this one's called the superior vena cava. So blood comes into the superior and inferior vena cava, goes from the right atrium to the right ventricle. And then it's going to leave the right ventricle, so we need to now have another blood vessel, because it goes to the lungs here. And this one, the blood vessels that go to and from the lungs are always called pulmonary. This one's called the pulmonary. Sorry, I'm just drawing it all over you. Pulmonary vein. And then it comes back in through the pulmonary artery. I'll turn that heating off now, it's getting warm, isn't it? So we've got the superior vena cava, the right atrium, the right ventricle, pulmonary vein, lungs, pulmonary artery, and then the last one, it goes down here, from here, and it needs to leave to go to the rest of the body. This one, although it's going to get a bit confusing, comes from here and it goes all the way round to the rest of the body, and this is called the aorta. But don't stress, because when we go through that video, it goes through all of them. We literally don't stop talking about it, do we? So looking at your picture, what's this chamber?
Right atrium. Left ventricle. Right ventricle.
Right ventricle.
Left atrium. Left ventricle.
What's the vein that goes into the right atrium?
Superior and inferior vena cava.
And then it goes through this valve here,
Tricuspid valve.
into the,
Right ventricle.
and then out through the
Pulmonary valve.
pulmonary valve, which starts the main part of the vein, and then the pulmonary vein, pulmonary artery, sorry.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the,
Lungs.
comes back in through the,
Pulmonary.
I think I've marked yours wrong. I think I've drawn it on wrong. So it goes out of the heart through the pulmonary artery, comes back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. I think I've done that the wrong way around on yours.
You said it the wrong way around, but you drew it the right way.
Yeah, perfect. I think I wrote the wrong thing on each one. And it comes into the,
Left atrium.
goes through the,
Tricuspid valve.
gets into the,
Left ventricle.
and leaves through the,
Aortic valve through the aorta.
perfect. Okay, so that is what we've just done, isn't it? We've just used our diagram to go through it all. So that's the thing that you need to make sure that we can do. So we need to label the pathway of the blood through the heart. Can anyone do that without me saying a thing?
Yeah.
Do you know what, Sarah? Look at Jemima's picture, that will help you see it as well. Go then, Jemima, go first, then I go after.
It goes in through the superior and inferior vena cavas,
Yeah.
into the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, through the pulmonary valve. How do you
Yes,
say?
pulmonary valve.
Oh, pulmonary valve, through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, then it comes back through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium, through the bicuspid valve, into the left ventricle, through the aortic to the aorta, out through the body.
Perfect. Happy with that?
Yeah.
Go on then.
Right.
You've done this at home and you make sure you can do it now, haven't you?
I did do it at home. I'm pretty sure I can do it. It goes in through the superior and inferior vena cava, into the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, through the pulmonary valve,
Yeah.
into the pulmonary artery, out to get like oxygen from the lungs, comes back through the pulmonary veins into the left aorta,
Left atrium.
atrium, and then through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle,
Out through the...
the aortic valve through the aorta.
Perfect, we've got it. So each time we've got it, just picture in your head it going through the heart. But it shows that you know all of the heart now. So we have now learnt about the pathway of blood through the heart. We know that it does get oxygen from the lungs and then goes to the rest of the body. But we haven't actually learnt about the lungs and how we get the oxygen. So today we're going to do the respiratory system. So when we look at the respiratory system, we know that every organ in the body needs oxygen. Everything that we do needs oxygen for that energy to function. So the respiratory system is a system of organs and vessels that gives oxygenated blood to the body tissues and removes waste gases. So it's just got two jobs. It's got the first job is to get oxygen, second job is to take away carbon dioxide. So that might be to the working muscles, it might be to our digestive system, it could be every working organ needs that, whether it's our brain. So that's what we're going to look at today. One of the things that you need to know is what's inside the air that we inhale and exhale. So when we inhale air, 20% of it is oxygen and 0.4% is carbon dioxide. So if we're talking about rounding, we're going to round that down, so we're still on 20%. So then when we exhale it, there's only 16% oxygen now, so there must be 4% carbon dioxide because we still want that 20% of what we're looking at. What's the percentage of inhaled of oxygen?
20%.
And exhaled?
60.
Yeah, 20, 0.4 carbon dioxide, and then exhaled air?
16.
And 4, perfect. Remember that because we're going to come back to it at the end. So these are two key terms that they'll talk about when we're learning about oxygen and our breathing rates. So we've got vital capacity and tidal volume. So with these two, you're actually quite lucky. In AQA, there's about 6 ones that you need to learn, and in Excel, they only want you to learn 2 of them. So tidal volume is the amount of air inspired and expired during a normal breath. So when you're sitting here, just the amount you breathe in and out in every breath is your tidal volume. Nothing changes, it's just normal. It's not during exercise as such, we're looking at a normal breath. Well, it is during exercise as well, but at the moment we're looking at normal breath. And then vital capacity is the greatest amount of air that can be made to pass into and out of the lungs by the most forceful inspiration and expiration. So it's normally about 5 litres, you don't need to remember that. But it's when you're forcing as much air, it's the biggest breath you can do, and then it's the biggest breath out you can do as well. So it's not just big breath in and then another breath in. So it's that long breath. So there's a little machine that you can do, I don't know if you've ever done it at the doctor's. So a little tube that you breathe in, and then you have to breathe out as long as you possibly can to get all of that air out of your lungs. So tidal volume is just the normal, and vital capacity is when you're forcing air in and out. So this is not something that's going to be in... Oh, sorry, let's do this first and then we'll come back to that bit, sorry, that I was talking about. So this is a little question that might come up. So Sarah's tidal volume and vital capacity was measured as 500 millilitres and 5 litres respectively at rest. So her tidal volume is 500 millilitres and her vital capacity is 5 litres. Following these measurements, Sarah went for a 5-minute jog. What happened to her tidal volume and vital capacity? So we've measured these when she's resting. We've now gone for a 5-minute jog. What's happened?
How fit is Sarah?
It wouldn't make a difference. So I don't want to know like working out anything. Has it increased, decreased, stayed the same? What do you think's happened to it? So tidal volume, remember, that's just your normal breath. What would have happened to your normal breath?
It will become...
You're going to exercise. We need more oxygen, don't we? So all of a sudden we take those bigger breaths. So when you're breathing, sitting down, resting, your breath is quite silent. I can't hear it. I don't want to hear you panting the whole time to just be sitting here. But if you think about when you exercise, you need much more oxygen in. So all of a sudden I can hear your breath when you're running because you're getting bigger breaths in and you're breathing more often because we want more oxygen. So her tidal volume increases. What's happened to her vital capacity? Think about what vital capacity is. What happens during exercise to your vital capacity? It gets used. So vital capacity is breathing as much as you possibly can in, as much as you possibly can out. Is that going to change during exercise? all of a sudden, can you breathe in more than your maximum when you're exercising? And you can't breathe out more than your maximum, so it will stay the same. So vital capacity does not change regardless of exercise, but your tidal volume does, because that's just your normal breath. So all of a sudden your normal breath is getting bigger. So this graph here, sorry, I keep thinking that I've done less. So this is what you've just told me. So tidal volume increases because we need to get more oxygen in per breath to supply the working muscles, but vital capacity remains constant because already at its greatest amount. We will get to the bit that I keep trying to talk to you about. Okay, so this is a graph of our breath. So we can see our different breaths here going in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out, in, out. Where's the tidal volume on that graph? Like here?
No.
So tidal volume's our normal breath.
Yeah, it's small.
So happy that this is our tidal volume?
Yeah.
So where is the vital capacity?
The big ones.
This to this. So the amount going in and the amount going out. So that measurement from here to here is our vital capacity, and the measurement from here to here is our tidal volume. So we can see by this graph, can't we, that this can't get any bigger with exercise. That's its at maximum at the top and bottom, and this is just our normal breath. So when we exercise, this graph, these two lines would be wider and it would be bigger. These terms you don't need to learn. So actually there's not really any point in me going through these two with you. All this is residual volume. This isn't on the exam, but I think it's quite helpful to understand it. No matter how forcefully you breathe out, there's always that little bit left in there because your lungs will just collapse with nothing in there at all. So you breathe out as much as you possibly can, but there's always that little bit of air left in there, and that's called the residual volume. That shouldn't come up in the exam, it's not on the specification, but it's just these two terms, so the maximum in and the maximum out, and our normal breath at rest or exercise. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you'll still have that normal breath. Okay, so now we've looked at the breathing terms, these are our lungs. So again, we're going to look at the pathway of oxygen this time, because we're not looking at blood. So we've got the larynx here in our throat. The trachea is this big pipe here going down the middle. And then from our trachea, it breaks off into two. One is bronchus, or two bronchi. So when you're talking about both, it's I instead of a US. So we go, the air comes in through the larynx, down the trachea, and then it breaks off and goes into both bronchi. From here, it then passes down these smaller tubes called bronchioles, and then finally reaches the alveoli. The alveoli, sorry, I'm just going to turn the heater now because it's really warm. The alveoli is where gaseous exchange happens. We spoke about gaseous exchange last week. What does that mean?
The exchange between carbon dioxide and oxygen.
Yeah, it's just the exchange of those two gases. So we've got the oxygen comes in through the mouth and nose, goes through the larynx, down the trachea, into the bronchi, into the bronchioles, and into the alveoli. That is the pathway of the air into our lungs. These muscles here, so we've got the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm, are our respiratory muscles. There's only two respiratory muscles that we need to talk about. And that's our diaphragm and our intercostal muscles. These intercostal muscles, the white bits are our ribs. So the intercostal muscles are in between each rib. So they contract and they move our ribs. When you know when our ribs are moving in and out when we're breathing, it's the intercostal muscles that allow for that. So remember, bones can't just move by themselves, it's the muscles that move in those bones. And then the diaphragm, generally it's this kind of curved bell shape. That's when it's relaxed. So when it's relaxed, it's just nice and curved. When it tenses, it goes straight. So it goes curved to relax, tense when it's straightened. And then obviously we've got the heart and the ribs. So how does the air come down through it? Can anyone talk me through it? So it goes in through the, down the,
Trachea,
into the,
bronchi,
yeah,
bronchioles,
bronchioles, alveoli. Perfect. So the pathway there, what you just said, goes in through the mouth and nasal cavity, through the larynx, down the trachea, down the bronchi into the bronchioles, into the alveoli, and then oxygen is swapped for carbon dioxide there, and air travels back to breathe out the carbon dioxide, then air obviously goes back out through the mouth once it's full of carbon dioxide. I'm going to ask you soon to combine this with the pathway of blood. Do you need to jot down any clues kind of thing, like one thing per bullet point, or do you reckon you can remember all of that?
I think I could remember it, but I don't know if I will.
Do you want to jot down anything?
No.
No? You happy? Happy?
Yeah.
We'll see about that in a little bit. So, we are racing through, but then there's lots of questions. So we've looked at how the air comes down, and we know that when we inspire, breathe in, and expire, breathe out, our lungs change, don't they? We can see our ribs physically moving. So we need to look at how the process of inspiration and expiration actually works, because it doesn't just happen. Those breathing muscles have to work to allow it. So when we inspire and expire, we have to change the pressure inside our lungs. So it's the muscles that will dictate the pressure inside the lungs. To inspire, so to breathe in, we need to create space for the air to flow in. So we can't have our lungs full of air already, because we can't then breathe in. So we need to increase the capacity of the lungs. So to breathe in, we need to make our lungs bigger. Does that make sense? So when we're breathing in, our lungs get bigger to let in the air. Therefore, when we expire, we need to force the air out. So we need to make our lungs smaller to force the air out. So, let's look at inspiration first. So we're going to change the capacity of the lungs. So when we breathe in, we're going to make the capacity bigger, and when we breathe out, we're going to make the capacity smaller. So the two muscles responsible are the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. So to inspire, both of these muscles contract and they increase the capacity. This makes sense if you think about it. When you're breathing in, that's you working. We're actually physically working to breathe in. When we're breathing out, we're just kind of resting. So the muscles work during inspiration, they relax during expiration. So when we inspire, our diaphragm and intercostal muscles contract, and it increases the capacity of the lungs. And it does that because if we think of the diaphragm, when it's relaxed, it's a curve, isn't it? So the lung space is quite small above it. But when it contracts, it goes straight.
The lungs have more space.
Yeah, have a lot more space to expand.
It can't really go more outwards, frontwards because of the ribs.
Well, I'm going to tell you about that as well, but kind of, yeah. So the diaphragm increases the capacity at the bottom by contracting and going straight. So all of a sudden we've got a much bigger space inside. The intercostal muscles also contract, and they're in between each rib, aren't they? When they contract, they move the ribs up and out. So if you think about the lungs now, they've got more space at the bottom because the diaphragm's flattened, and they've got more space at the side because the ribs have gone out, and more space at the top because the ribs have gone up. So all of a sudden the capacity of the lungs is much bigger. And then obviously when we expire, these muscles relax. So now the ribs here are going in and down.
Is that why it's hard to keep your shoulders down when you're trying to breathe in a lot?
I think that's just you moving it up. It's not necessarily linked. I think that's just, you know, like a type of thing where if you put mascara on, you have your mouth open. I think that's more something like that opposed to your ribs moving. So when you expire, the muscles relax, diaphragm goes up, so it gets smaller here. The ribs go in and down, so it's got smaller again.
Yeah.
So imagine it, we're breathing in, our ribs are going to go up and out because the intercostal muscles are contracted. We're breathing out, we relax, so our ribs go in and down. Feel it. Do a nice big deep breath in. Can you feel your ribs coming out slightly? And you can definitely feel them going up. Diaphragm we can't feel, but just imagine the diaphragm's coming down on breathing in and then going up when we're breathing out. But we can definitely, if you do a big breath in, you can definitely feel those ribs go up and out. Okay. So we've labelled the lungs and we know the pathway of oxygen through the lungs. We've looked a little bit on how the muscles of the respiratory system allow for us to breathe in and out. The main thing we need to look at is gases exchange. the reason we breathe in and out is for this to happen, because we want that oxygen and we want to get rid of that carbon dioxide. That's the main function of the respiratory system. So the process of inspiration and expiration take place to allow for gases exchange. Gases exchange is the delivery of oxygen from the lungs to the bloodstream and the removal of carbon dioxide from the tissues. And it takes place at the alveoli in the lungs. So if we think about the blood goes through the heart, is all deoxygenated at this point, isn't it? Because it's come from our working muscles and it's come back through the vena cava into the heart, and it goes through the pulmonary artery to the lungs. It's got lots of carbon dioxide because it's a waste product of exercise or energy creation, and it needs to pick up oxygen. So it goes from the heart into the lungs, and it's going to go to the alveoli, and it's going to start picking up oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide. Then the blood will continue its journey to the working muscles back through the heart, and the air will continue its journey back out to breathe out the carbon dioxide. So we're going to look at how that swap actually takes place. Before we look at that, what blood vessel does gases exchange take place in? The capillaries. So if you imagine the alveoli, they're kind of like lots of little balls. There's capillaries all around it. Do we know this already? I think I showed you a picture of this already, didn't I, last week?
To read the book.
And you've read it up on it. So we're going to look at the capillaries that are around it and the alveoli inside it. So when we inspire, the diaphragm and intercostal muscles contract. The diaphragm flattens and the ribs move up and out. Therefore, the volume of lungs increases. If the volume increases, but it's still got the same amount of things inside it, the pressure inside it must decrease. Does that make sense or not really? Because it might take a minute to get your head around it. Because if you think about, let's talk about the blood vessels. We know arteries have high blood pressure because there's so much blood going through it at once, and pressure is the amount of force put onto something.
Oh, yeah.
So if
there's more space for it to just kind of hang around.
Yeah.
There's not so much pressure.
So now
on the
all these
outside.
molecules are just moving everywhere and there's no pressure on them. It's like having 100 people in this room. The pressure inside this room is now much bigger or much higher. But as soon as we get rid of everyone and there's just the 4 of us again, the pressure will drop. So imagine this is our lungs. We're just about to inspire. The pressure is really low because there's hardly anyone in here. Now those 100 people outside are air molecules that are going to come in as well. All of a sudden the pressure's increased. So the diaphragm and intercostal muscles contract. The diaphragm flattens, intercostal muscles move up and out, so we've got a big space in there. The volume of lungs has increased, therefore the pressure has decreased and air flows in. This is helpful in gases exchange as well, because we know that gases will go from areas of high pressure to low pressure. So once we've decreased the pressure inside our lungs, the air will flow in because we're going from high pressure to low pressure. And then it's going to be exactly the same when we're looking at expiring. So this time is a passive process, which means we just relax. The muscles aren't working, they're relaxed this time. So our diaphragm relaxes, it goes up, our intercostal muscles relax, and the ribs go down and in. And then the volume of lungs decreases. We haven't expired yet, all that air is still in there, and the volume has decreased, therefore we're going to start forcing that air out because the pressure's increased. So the pressure inside the lungs is lower than the pressure outside, so the air's being forced up, out the bronchioles, up through the bronchi, up the trachea, through the larynx, and then out through the mouth and nose. So I want you to remember that we're always going to look at the movement of gases from high pressure or high concentration to low, because that's really important when we're looking at gases exchange when they swap. So this gases exchange is taking place at the alveoli, and it's just the swapping of the two gases. Can you see this picture?
Yeah.
If not, it's
Kind of.
in your book, just I think maybe page 26?
It's at page 33.
33.
Oh, yeah.
It's much closer to see it there. So this is our alveoli in the middle, and this is a capillary running around the outside of it. Every alveoli will have lots of capillaries running around the outside, and that both are only one cell thick. So we spoke about capillaries being only one cell thick. Alveolular's got to be the same because we've got to have gases pass through both. We don't want it to come out the capillaries and not get into the alveoli. So if we look here, we've got the deoxygenated blood going through. So imagine this is in the lungs. This has come through the pulmonary vein. So we've got the pulmonary artery here, sorry. Pulmonary artery here, because I'm thinking of deoxygenated blood. Capillary, pulmonary artery here. So we've got the blood coming through the pulmonary artery, and it's now coming through this capillary. In this time here, before it leaves, we need to have those swapping of gases. So we need to make sure that everything possible can happen, because it's got to happen in such a short space of time. So making sure these are one cell thick speeds up the process. So deoxygenated blood goes in, it's full of carbon dioxide. So then the carbon dioxide is going to go into the alveoli, the oxygen comes in, and then the blood continues through the heart and then to the rest of the body. That swaps because of the concentration in the blood and the concentration in alveoli. So in this blood, the concentration of carbon dioxide is really high. We know it's only 0.4 here, don't we, of carbon dioxide from when we inspire. So it's going to move from concentration high to concentration low. Whereas oxygen, it's got 20% oxygen here. This is deoxygenated blood, it doesn't have any oxygen in it. So the oxygen is going to move from high concentration to low concentration into capillaries. Does this make sense? Kind of, a lot, or not really? Be honest. Kinda. So this is our deoxygenated blood running through. Deoxygenated blood has a high concentration of carbon dioxide. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Because that's our waste product of energy. So it's running through this high concentration of carbon dioxide. Gases exchange always takes place from high concentration to low concentration. So gases will always move from an area of high concentration to low concentration because it wants to equal it out. So it's going to move from high to low to try and equal out that imbalance. So we've got carbon dioxide all in the blood, no carbon dioxide in the alveoli, or 0.4 in the alveoli. So carbon dioxide is going to move into the alveoli. But at the same time, there's no oxygen in this blood, but there's lots of oxygen in the alveoli. So it's going to be exactly the same. The oxygen is going to move from high concentration in the alveoli to a low concentration in the capillaries. And then that oxygen will be transported around the body. And it's just going to go on and on and on. Where else is gases exchange going to take place? Because it's got to take place at the alveoli to pick it up.
Between your vein and your arteries when they meet in different parts of your body.
But where? Give me an example. So this has taken place here because the blood needs oxygen and the lungs need to breathe out the carbon dioxide. Where's that blood going to where it's going to need to happen again?
The heart.
It's going to go to the heart and then it's being transported to the muscle. So it's going to have to happen at the muscle as well, isn't it? Because we need that oxygen at the muscle to work, and then a waste product of energy is carbon dioxide, so it's going to take the carbon dioxide away. So, oxygen and carbon dioxide move from areas of high concentration to low concentration. Air inhaled has a high oxygen concentration, whereas the blood arriving at the lungs to collect oxygen currently has a low concentration. Therefore, oxygen moves from the alveoli into the blood in the capillaries to be transported around the body. Then exactly the same with the other way around. The blood arriving at the lungs has a high concentration of carbon dioxide because it's come from the working muscles, whereas the inhaled air inside the alveoli has a low concentration. Therefore, the carbon dioxide moves from the bloodstream and into the alveoli for us to breathe out. And this is just a point that makes this process efficient. So sometimes you might get a question, what characteristics of the alveoli improve the efficiency of gaseous exchange? So same as what we looked at last week, the characteristics of arteries that make it suitable for its job, or the characteristics of capillaries that make it suitable for its job. So the things that make it suitable is that alveoli have a large surface area. So these alveoli are circular and there's loads of them. Because if we imagine, because it's circular, the capillaries have to go around these millions of alveoli in our lungs, which means the surface area is massive. If it was just one strip line, it'd just be a really low surface area, so the gases exchange would only have that space to do it. Similar to our intestines, although it's only in a small space, they're ridiculously long to allow that process to take place. It's the same for the alveoli. So the surface area of them is ginormous, so we've got lots of areas for that gaseous exchange to take place. They also have very thin walls. So same as the capillaries, they're only one cell thick, so it's easy for gases to pass in and out of. And lastly, they're surrounded by capillaries. So every alveoli is surrounded by capillaries, so it means that gases exchange is effective as it possibly can be. Alveoli work best when they're moist and clean. So a healthy person has mechanisms for ensuring this. So when we breathe through our nose, and these are bits that we will know already, the air's filtered by our hairs and the mucus, which is sticky, so it means that we don't get any of that dust in when we're breathing in through our mouth, through our nose. But alongside that, it's also warmed by the blood vessels passing close to the surface of your nose. So our nose has lots of blood vessels around close to it, so that we warm the air and we moisten it and get rid of all the rubbish that's inside the air. So we've got that clean, warm air that's quickest to diffuse once we're in there. And then if we're breathing in through our mouth, it's also moistened by the water vapour inside. Are you thinking about doing it? I am giving you so much information today. How are you getting on with it so far? Is it too much or is it okay? You won't tell me anyway if it's too much, will you? When we start doing the questions, then we can dissect it all. Okay. I still don't believe you. So now we're going to look at how these two systems work together. So last lesson was all about the cardiovascular system. This lesson is all about the respiratory system. And it's a cardiorespiratory system when they're working together, because they don't ever work individually. We need the respiratory system to bring the oxygen in, and then we need the cardiovascular system to transport it. So they work alongside each other. And that's pretty much what I've just said. So the cardiorespiratory system is massively important for a sports performer, because we need the oxygen at the muscles and we need the oxygen inside our body. Okay, this is another key term, and when we look more a bit later about exercise, it might make even more sense. But if you notice after you've done your exercise, so it makes sense when we're exercising, our tidal volume increases, doesn't it? Because we need more oxygen. So that makes sense. But if I just tell you to go outside now and do a 10-minute run for me, when you come back, you don't need a lot of oxygen anymore, do you? You've stopped.
No.
But if I ask you to sit down straight away, will your breathing slow down yet?
No.
No, and that's because
You're still like...
Yeah, for a good 5 minutes after, aren't you? Maybe not quite as much, it'll gradually go down. But afterwards, your breathing rate is still increased. And it's because we've got oxygen debt, so we're trying to repay that oxygen debt that we've just used. So even after we've finished exercise, our breathing remains heavier for a while after. And it's because we've created an oxygen debt that we now need to repay. So exercise creates a waste product called lactic acid. Have we heard of this? You heard of lactic acid when you're playing football? Anyone have said it to you? You know when you've done something really hard, do you ever feel like your legs get heavier and heavier, and sometimes they cramps, especially if you watch football and when they're in that extra time, they're all on the floor with cramp because their legs are just full of lactic acid. So imagine you're doing a 100-metre sprint. To begin with, you feel like you're getting pretty fast, and if you're Usain Bolt, you'll do it the whole way. But if you're just us, we'll get to about 75 metres, and our legs just cannot work as fast as what they did at the beginning. Can you imagine how heavy your legs are by the end when you're running it? And it's because of lactic acid. So when we're working anaerobically, which is in a few slides along, we create something called lactic acid. The only way to break down that lactic acid is with oxygen. So we need to oxidize it to break it down. And then when we oxidize it, we turn it into carbon dioxide and water. And we can get rid of those, can't we? We breathe out carbon dioxide, we sweat water. So these two waste products are really easy to deal with. But lactic acid is like a toxic waste product. It's not helpful. We can't just get rid of it. We need to break it down. So the reason that we have this oxygen debt is I've just run my 100-metre sprint. My legs are now full of lactic acid. I can hardly walk. They're so heavy. So I need to keep breathing really heavy to get the oxygen in to break it down.
When I went to school, my cousin went to school with me, and now she's 18. Like a couple of years ago, they were doing their every it started from year 3, and she had to do hers, and they sports PE teachers, they made her whole class, they made them run around for 20 minutes on a 100-meter
Track.
track, and they made them run around on that for 10 minutes, and at the end my class was all there, and we heard everything that the PE teacher was saying, because we were we were doing it in different years, so everyone was there like a sports day. And then I heard her say something like lactic or laxive or something.
So that's, she was probably talking about lactic acid. Did you see when you was watching them how they got slower?
Yeah, at the start, our PE teacher told us that we should stay slow at the beginning, and then as we get to the end, we should start building up speed.
When you know you've got not long left, because then it doesn't matter if your muscles start getting tired then, because you've got your last 2 minutes. But what lactic acid does is it makes your muscles really heavy, and they fatigue and they cramp, so they're not very useful. So if we're talking about that 20-minute run, if you sprint to begin with and you get loads of lactic acid, you can't do the last 18 minutes because your legs are already finished. It doesn't work. That's why we need to, when we think about doing long distance running, pace ourselves, because the lactic acid is what makes us stop. So when I ran the marathon, my breathing was okay. I wasn't struggling to get oxygen in. I wasn't out of breath because I ran quite slowly. But by the end of it, I was almost walking. My legs were so heavy, I couldn't move them. So it was because my body, because I didn't train for the marathon very well, my legs couldn't cope with the amount of lactic acid. Whereas if I had trained, I would have made my body better at getting rid of it while I was working. But if I told you to go run a marathon now, your lactic acid in your legs would be, even if your fitness was good enough, your lactic acid in your legs would build up so much and they'd get so heavy and so tired that they just wouldn't be able to run it. So, sorry, coming back to oxygen debt, it does help to understand it anyway. So our oxygen debt, and this is kind of the definition, although you don't have to use the exact definition, is the amount of oxygen required at the end of physical activity to break down any lactic acid. So after we've done that 20-minute run, you'll see when they've all finished, their legs are aching, they all probably just want to sit down, but their breathing rate will increase and stay high because it's trying to break down that lactic acid that their legs are full of. Or if you've done anything like weight training, we get out of breath, although you've just done weights, you've not gone for a run, it's not an aerobic exercise where you need lots of oxygen. You're out of breath after because we're trying to get that oxygen in to break down the lactic acid that's building up in our arms or wherever we're doing it. Okay, so I've done loads of talking. I haven't stopped talking actually. So now someone else can do my talking for me. So I want you to imagine everything we've done is a story. So we've got this lovely book, and each process is 1 page in this book. So I want you to tell me a story of how the oxygen in the air makes it from the air to the working muscles. But to do that, it's got to go in through the respiratory system, but then it switches to the cardiovascular system to get to the muscle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's already gone to the heart though, which makes it even more.
It's going to go to heart in the middle, isn't it? It's going to go into the lungs, to the bloodstream, to the heart, to the working muscle, and then back to the heart, and then back out. So that's quite a long journey.
Okay.
But I just want you to do half of it. I don't care about, because if we're looking at the story of just the oxygen, once the oxygen's out that muscle, it's being used, it's the carbon dioxide that comes back out. Do you want to give it a go?
Wait, no, but if sorry. No, but so you breathe it in, then obviously it goes to your lungs.
Yeah.
But then the deoxygenated blood is supposed to come from your heart. So the air should have gone to your heart rather than the lungs first, because it's got to go through the lungs first to go back to the heart to pump it through the body.
Imagine if you're the oxygen, so the oxygen's in the air, it'll go in through our mouth and nose, down through our larynx, down our trachea, into the bronchi, I'm just going to go through all of it, into bronchioli, into the alveoli. So now I'm at where gases exchange takes place. So this is my oxygen in my lungs, and then I've got my capillary going round my alveoli. So that's deoxygenated, there's no oxygen there yet. Now I'm going to do the switch. So in my capillary I've got the carbon dioxide, my alveoli I've got the oxygen. Now I'm going to do a switch. And I only care about this oxygen because I'm telling the story of oxygen. So ignore that carbon dioxide, I don't care about that. I'm looking at this one oxygen molecule that's following. So I'm now in my capillaries. So I'm kind of halfway through that pathway of the blood through the heart. So you kind of cutting both pathways in half and they interject halfway in. So I'm at the capillaries and I'm going to go back to the heart now because I've got the oxygen and I want to go around the body. So I'm going to go the pulmonary. Do you get it? So
but
we go
then
the
how
pulmonary
does air
vein.
get to like even though like that's not exactly what we're doing, how does the air get to the heart first to actually get through the system before it goes through the pulmonary artery?
So air's
deoxygenated?
not in the blood, we're just looking at carbon dioxide and oxygen.
Oh
So
my
ignore
God, I've been so stupid.
Ignore the
oh,
air.
sorry. Never mind. I've
Does it make sense
answered my
now?
own question. Sorry.
But that, you need to ask it so you can picture it, because for this to make sense you need to picture it. So when I'm doing this, I physically picture the oxygen's here, goes here, here. Right, now I'm going to switch to this system. Now I'm going to work a muscle. Now I've got rid of the oxygen, I've done the switch, and I'm back to carbon dioxide. I'm going to this system, go through the heart, back to the lungs. Now I'm breathing out. Now I've got the opposite. Does that make sense? So picture it. Go on, have a go now. Now it's kind of clear in your head. So with the oxygen in the air, what's going to happen to this oxygen?
It goes in through your nose and mouth.
Yeah.
Through the larynx.
Yeah.
Down the trachea.
Yeah.
Then into the bronchi.
Yeah.
Then into the smaller
Bronchioles, yeah.
bronchioles. Into the alveoli.
Yeah.
Then just the gaseous exchange with the carbon dioxide, and it goes into the capillaries.
Yeah.
And then it goes back into the heart through the pulmonary vein, into the left atrium through the bicuspid valve,
Yeah.
into the left ventricle through the aortic valve, out of the aorta, and then it gets towards muscles in the heart.
Well done, that was really good.
Yeah.
Selena, are you ready? So I
Yeah.
now know the story of oxygen,
Yeah.
but I now know the story of carbon dioxide from my working muscles, through my heart, and out to the air. So picture it. So carbon dioxide's at my leg. How's it going to get back to the heart?
It's gonna
Will it be superior or inferior if it's down here?
inferior.
Okay, so it's going to go through the inferior vena cava.
Oh, into the right atrium.
Yeah.
Through the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle. Through the pulmonary valve into through the pulmonary arteries.
Yeah, arteries away.
Away collects oxygen from the lungs.
So now we're looking at just the carbon dioxide. So forget the oxygen. So now we're gonna go through the pulmonary artery, you said, and then it must go through the capillaries. Now it's gonna swap to where? Alveoli. Good. So now we've got the carbon dioxide in the alveoli. Now go backwards from the alveoli to the bronchioles,
Bronchioles.
through the bronchi, up the trachea, through the larynx, coccyx in your pelvis. We want it to go there. Through the larynx and out through the mouth and nose. Sorry, do you want to have a go? It's quite tough with the heart when you haven't looked at the heart. Okay, so start from the oxygen again. So we've got oxygen in the air. Where will it go in first?
It goes to the mouth and nose, it goes down the larynx.
Larynx, perfect.
Trachea to the bronchioles.
Perfect.
And then the alveoli.
Perfect.
To
Then we're going to do the switch into
the
C.
gaseous.
Yeah, perfect. So we've got the gases exchange that takes place, so the oxygen then goes into what blood vessel surrounds it?
capillaries.
Perfect, into capillaries.
And then to
So when the blood vessels that link the heart and the lungs is always pulmonary, and the easiest way to remember arteries is A for away, so it must be veins, go back to it. So it's got to be the pulmonary because it's linking the heart and the lungs. It's got to be a vein because it's going towards the heart.
so the pulmonary
Vein into this top chamber here.
the left atrium.
Perfect.
To
Through
the bicuspid valve.
perfect.
To the left ventricle.
Perfect. Then it goes through
The
aortic
aortic
valve, and then it's the aorta, which is the vessel down to any muscle you like. Once it's left the heart, it's just going to wherever it's needed. That was really good. Impressed with that? Define vital capacity. What is vital capacity?
The maximum you can breathe in and out.
Good. So it's when you forcefully inhale and exhale, and it's the maximum you can breathe in and out. What about tidal volume?
So average breathing rate. But that can go up and
Yes, wherever you are. Yeah. So it's at rest or during exercise. Yeah, of course you can.
Do veins carry oxygen?
So veins carry deoxygenated blood
Okay.
apart from the pulmonary vein.
up there. Awesome.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What's oxygen debt?
Oh, so after you've done a run, for example, you'll still be breathing heavy because your
Lactic acid.
lactic acids are like, you need to like get more oxygen to sort of pay it off. Like,
Yeah, to break down that lactic acid. So oxygen debt is the amount of air required after exercise to help you break down the lactic acid. How much O2 and CO2 is inhaled air and exhaled? To start with inhaled, how much O2
20,
and CO2?
0.4,
Exhaled
16,
and
4.
perfect. Well done. I've spoken loads at you today and it's actually going in. Well done. Right, so we've looked at the structures of the body and how we get oxygen to the muscles. Now we need to look at how oxygen is used to create energy and recovery. So we've kind of looked at everything now, the main structures, the skeleton, the muscular system, the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system. So we know how the oxygen gets into the body, we know how it gets around the body.
What's the rest of the book for?
Oh, don't worry, there's loads, psychology, everything, it's not just all body. So we know that oxygen is needed to create energy, but we haven't really looked at how the oxygen creates energy. So we're going to look at energy now. So, energy is needed for muscles to work. You're right.
Yeah.
Pick it up if you need to, if you've got something. So muscles need that energy, the oxygen to work. The energy that comes from food, sorry, there's a couple of spelling mistakes here. That energy that comes from food, I can't read what I'm doing. Sorry, the energy that we need to work comes from food. So we convert the energy that comes in from food into glucose in the body. So the muscles and liver store glucose as glycogen. So from the food we get glucose, but we store it as glycogen. This is then converted back to glucose before we do exercise. So we can only store glucose as glycogen, but we can only use it as glucose. So when it comes into our body, we convert it to glycogen to store it, convert it back to glucose when we want to use it again. And to work most efficiently, we need lots of oxygen. We're going to look at these two processes, anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration. So depending on what activity we're doing, depends on what type of respiration we're going to use. And you've probably heard of these terms anyway. So aerobic respiration means energy created with oxygen. So the type of respiration that or type of energy that this type of respiration makes is for like low intensity activities or ones that last a long amount of time. So if I told you to go do that 20-minute run, generally that's aerobic, and you know that you're breathing quite a lot. If I told you to go for a 100-metre sprint, that would be anaerobic because you haven't got enough time to get that oxygen in because you're going too quickly, and it lasts less than 60 seconds. So aerobic is ones with a low intensity or low to moderate. When you're running the marathon, it's not low, you're not walking, but it's low in comparison to what high is, and it lasts much longer than 60 seconds. So the way that we can create energy using aerobic is all we do is use the glucose and the oxygen, and that will convert energy with the waste products, carbon dioxide and water. These two, the glucose and oxygen, are brought to the muscles in the blood. So the blood will go to the muscle that needs to work, and it will supply the muscle with glucose and oxygen. The muscle will then use them to create energy, but by making that energy, they make these two waste products. These two waste products we can deal with, can't we? They can both be absorbed by the blood and lost either through sweat for water and carbon dioxide we know we just breathe out. So aerobic respiration is a really efficient process
with very little waste product, or waste products that we can deal with. Whereas anaerobic respiration is going to give us this toxic waste product. So anaerobic is just the opposite, is energy created without oxygen. So this type of respiration is for really high intensity activities and ones that are less than 60 seconds. So we use the anaerobic respiration because we can't get oxygen in quick enough. So aerobic isn't going to provide enough energy for these type of activities because we can't get that oxygen in quick enough to supply it. So for these ones, we're using just the glucose. But because if we think about the oxygen debt that we've already spoke about, because we're just using glucose with no oxygen, we know that it's going to create lactic acid this time. So we've got energy and lactic acid as the waste product. And then if we think about our oxygen debt that we already spoke about, this can be broken down again, can't it, into CO2 and water when oxygen is present. So this is a toxic waste product and it's not helpful. So we know it's going to make us super tired. I want you to have a go, just on a piece of paper in front of you. Have a table, so aerobic and anaerobic. Can you put all of these activities into which column? So is it an aerobic activity or an anaerobic? You might find that you might have a couple that you're not sure on, but I don't think I've been mean in this. I think I have tried to do aerobic or anaerobic rather than a mixture of both. There's 11 in total. So have a think about, is it high intensity, low intensity? Does it last for longer than 60 seconds? A really powerful movement would be high intensity, wouldn't it? Just that one big powerful movement. Your titles look like the right thing. You're carrying them all together, but you've got them the wrong way around. But I know that you know what you're doing if you put them all together in the right area. I think anything that's really fast and powerful would be anaerobic.
The long
If-
cycle away from France to like England.
Yeah.
What?
It's a really long cycle race. So it's like a marathon for cycling that goes over a number of days.
Oh yay.
So if it's long, it's generally a lower intensity because we can't sprint forever, therefore we must be using oxygen. You definitely can't run a marathon, so you can't run for 4 hours with no oxygen. So anything that's longer, we must be using oxygen. Whereas if you think about weightlifting, although you might do it for a long period of time, it's the one movement. So that movement is quick, so we're not going to get the oxygen in quick enough to just do that big chest press. So where would marathon be, aerobic or anaerobic?
Aerobic.
Yeah, it's long, so we're using oxygen. Weightlifting, 1500 metres?
I'd say anaerobic.
1500 metres. So they'll generally take about 4 minutes to do that.
Oh, aerobic.
Yeah, aerobic. Although they're fast runners, they're needing oxygen in that time. Shot put?
Oh, that's anaerobic.
Good. Walking netball.
Aerobic.
Race walking.
Aerobic.
Do you know what race walking is? Have you seen them in the Olympics when they're racing but they've got to walk, so one foot's always got to be on? They move their hips loads when they're walking. Have you seen them? Have you never seen it? But it's like, Google it or YouTube it when you go home. It's a race and one foot's always got to be on the floor, but it almost looks like they're running, but it's really strict that their legs, one has to be on the floor the whole time, so they can't have that run. So that is aerobic. 400 metres race. So that's one lap of the track. that would fall under anaerobic, because the time it takes to do it, for a professional, they will sprint that and they'll get that done and be able to use the anaerobic system. If we went and did the 400 metres, it would probably be more aerobic. It would start off anaerobic, but we'd move towards aerobic because it would take us much longer than an athlete. The triathlon,
Anaerobic.
the high jump,
Anaerobic.
perfect, it's just that one powerful movement. Tour de France,
Anaerobic.
and 100 metre sprint,
Anaerobic.
anaerobic. So any sort of sprint, powerful activities are anaerobic. Aerobic are the longer ones. Okay, we have spoke quite a bit about this earlier. So looking at the lactic acid, we know that lactic acid is a waste product of anaerobic respiration. It doesn't come from aerobic, we're looking at anaerobic. The build-up of lactic acid causes fatigue and cramp, and the harder you work, the quicker the lactic acid builds up. So if you sprint as fast as you possibly can, it's going to build up much quicker than if I ask you to do about 80%. So even though when you're doing about 80% of your maximum, it's going to be anaerobic still, and you're going to build up lactic acid. It will be slower. You'll be able to run for a longer distance at 80% than you can at 100%. And oxygen is needed to break down and remove the lactic acid.
If you want to get rid of lactic acid, would you just be able to run forever really quick?
If you didn't have... No, because there's only so much glucose stored as well, or glycogen stored, so we still run out of the energy source. But you'd be able to run for further at a higher intensity, because generally it's the lactic acid that slows you down before the glucose.
Yeah.
Because we've got about 60 seconds worth of anaerobic respiration. You definitely can't work at 100% for 60 seconds, that's a long time.
Yeah.
And it'll be your lactic acid that will slow you down first rather than your supply of energy. So looking at him, who's he?
Usain Bolt.
Perfect. So Usain Bolt, we're going to look at 100 metre sprint. So an inexperienced sprinter will feel the build-up of lactic acid in their muscles before finishing the 100 metre sprint. Their muscles will feel much heavier and they won't be able to produce the same amount of power as they did at the beginning of the race. So that's an inexperienced. Whereas an experienced sprinter such as Usain Bolt will have a higher threshold to lactic acid due to training, and therefore will not experience the same pain during the race as a beginner. So because he's trained, he can deal with it better. It won't build up so quick because his body's more efficient. So what we're going to look at next lesson is all about the impact of exercise, and our bodies adapt to everything we do. So if we train, our bodies get better. So obviously he trains a lot. However, Usain Bolt will still have a build-up of lactic acid at the end of the race due to the high intensity he was working at. So because he'll still have that build-up of lactic acid, what will he experience at the end of the race? He'll experience fatigue, and then what will his body do to deal with that?
Breathe.
Yeah, we'll breathe in a lot because of that oxygen debt, and we're getting more oxygen to break down the lactic acid. Whereas, who's he?
David Beckham.
Yeah. So if we look at football, that's very different, isn't it? Because there's some sprints, there's some walks, there's some jogs, but it lasts for 90 minutes. So team sports like just football are slightly different. But we could be talking about football, we could be talking about hockey, we could be talking about netball, we could be talking about lacrosse, any sort of team sports where it's high intensity, low intensity, moderate intensity, and it's constantly swapping. So in these sports, the athletes use aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So after periods of high intensity, there will be periods of low intensity for them to recover. So if David Beckham's just gone for a sprint, he can't keep that up for all 90 minutes.
No.
There'll be a point where he can now jog or walk because the ball's somewhere else in the pitch and he's not involved in it. So it's during these times of low intensity that we need to repay that oxygen debt during the game. So we think 100 metre sprint, it's nice and easy, that's short, it's done, oxygen debt is done after the race. But we've got to play football for 90 minutes. We can't continue doing loads of sprints and lactic acid building up each time without breaking it back down. So we'll do one sprint, and then we might do a jog, and then we can get in some more oxygen, enough aerobic respiration to supply our jog, but a bit more to help us break down the lactic acid. But there might be that little bit of lactic acid left over because we haven't enough time before the next sprint. Then we do a next sprint, and then we might do it. Yeah, so by the end of the match, we'll still have that same effect because the lactic acid has built up after every single sprint. But in between each sprint, we break it down. Because if we didn't break it down in between each sprint, we couldn't last the 90 minutes. So aerobic respiration is really important for two reasons. One, it creates energy. We need it when we're jogging. It's an easy way to create energy without the build-up of lactic acid. But two, it's massively needed for recovery because aerobic respiration gets us oxygen in. So we need it during the match to break down the lactic acid so we can go for team sports for a long period of time. And then after whatever activity we're doing so we can move again after exercise opposed to our muscles always being full of lactic acid. Does that make sense? So aerobic respiration is the most important in terms of supplying energy for long amounts of time, but also taking away that or breaking down that lactic acid. Okay, task. I want you to use pages 38 and 39 to answer these 5 questions. So 38 and 39 go through energy sources in food. I want you just to kind of skim read all of it maybe to begin with, and then go back and find the answers to these 5 questions. The sound of them talking next door is really fun.
Which question number are you on?
5.
Oh, that was quick. Jemima?
She started the question.
Would you read them first? That's fine.
So,
Because you'll probably race through the questions where you've read it all already. Okay, one more minute.
What's a pet?
That's what we're going to do later. It's a personal, is it PEP is it about?
Yeah.
It's a personal exercise program. So part of the course is like a piece of coursework where you design your own personal exercise program. So does it talk about
we have to
completing
actually
it?
do it.
You'll do the fitness test. It helps to do it because a big part of it is evaluating it. And evaluating how good it is quite hard sometimes if you don't immerse yourself in it. Whereas, because on paper it might look like the most funnest thing ever, and then you do it like that was the boringest program I could have made up for myself. So if you do it at least for a couple of weeks, then you can, when you evaluate, you're like, actually, I should have made that a bit harder to begin with because it was too easy, or this was this, and it makes it much easier to write about it. That's what it is. I didn't see what does it just refer into it?
Yeah, where is
Think about how you include energy sources into your plan. Oh, so when we go to writing them, then you might want to think about what food you should be eating to help you supply energy for that session. So maybe what's your meal before it, or what's your meal after it to help you recover. So looking at these bits should help you know what type of food you should be eating. Let's look at the questions together. What energy source is used, Selim, we'll start with you, as the main provider for high intensity exercise?
Carbohydrates.
Carbohydrates, good. Jemima, how are carbohydrates that you eat transferred into energy?
Broken down into glucose or
Glycogen.
glycose.
Perfect, glycogen. Zara, what are the two types of carbohydrate sources and which one's more beneficial for the body?
Complex and simple.
Perfect.
And complex.
And complex is better for the body. What's simple carbohydrates? What are they? What foods do we find simple carbohydrates in?
Biscuits, cakes, chocolate.
Yeah. Stuff that you kind of know when you see what simple carbohydrates are that aren't going to be as good for our body. So when people say about you should eat lots of carbohydrates before exercise because it helps you supply energy, and that's when we're looking at maybe longer distance where we're going to start using them more. What we know that they don't mean eat lots of biscuits and cakes before. We're thinking more about pastas and breads. Question 4, Senan, what type of exercise do fats supply energy for?
Long distance and low like
Intensity. Perfect. And Jemima, what energy source will supply energy for a football player and why? Might be a trick question.
I didn't get to that one.
That's alright, go on, Senan.
Equal amount of fats and carbohydrates.
Go on, why? Similar to that other question about aerobic and anaerobic,
See,
isn't
I
it?
wouldn't have got that because I know nothing about football.
Think about
This isn't
a
it.
team sport. Does it say it on there? I can't remember. Team
Yeah.
sport will be fast and slow.
I didn't get it. So it says for a longer exercise up to 2 hours.
Whereabouts are you? Oh, on the bullet
That's
point.
carbohydrates.
Oh, I didn't read past there because I realised everyone else was on the question.
That's right. And if you think about when we spoke about aerobic and anaerobic exercise in a football match, it's fast, then it's slow, then it's fast, then it's slow. So it's high intensity, low intensity. So it'll need carbohydrates, then it'll need fats. And because it's quite a long amount of time, we'll use all those carbohydrates. They'll be finished. So, and then we'll have to use our fat source. So generally, when we exercise, we'll use the carbohydrates that are stored in our body first, or the glucose that's stored, and then we'll finish that source of energy. So we need to move on to our fat source, because that will be the long-lasting source of energy that will keep us going. Okay, this is some bits that I'm gonna get you to answer them, and then after each question we'll come back and we'll talk about it and we'll look at the mark scheme. So use your paper, just because it's very easy when we verbalise for me to give you hints, and then you go, oh yeah, I would have got that mark, I would have got that one, and I would have got that one. But when we write it, it's going to be more reflective of the actual exam. So some are quite easy. So these ones should only take a second. Which one of the following is the correct classification of bones? So don't say it out loud yet. Just write one, A, B, C, or D. So which one is the following is a correct classification of bone for the carpals? Okay, Senna, is it A, B, C, or D? A. Everyone get that one right? Some of these is going back quite a while because we've not looked at this for a while. Oh. Which one of the following is an example of an involuntary muscle? So all you need to write it down is A, B, C, or D. Of involuntary muscle. Sarah? It's involuntary, we don't choose to move it. So we've got voluntary, involuntary, and cardiac. So muscle in the wall of the heart, because it's a heart, it must be cardiac. Muscle in the upper arm, do you choose to move your arm?
Yeah.
Be a bit worrying if all of a sudden if your arms are choosing to move themselves. Muscle in the lower leg, we again choose to move it, so it must be in the blood vessel because it does it by itself. We don't have a choice. Okay, still a multiple choice at the moment. So these are actual exam questions. So figure 1 shows a cross-section of the heart. So cross-section just means it's been cut in half. Identify the right atrium. So is it A, B, C, or D? Write it down first. Jemima?
B.
Perfect. And if you look, they've done it in different orders, how they've labelled A, B, C, and D, because generally you'd always go A, B, C, and D, so make sure you're looking at where that goes to. Okay, still multiple choice. So Luke recorded his heart rate as part of his personal exercise program. Figure 2 shows Luke's heart rate graphs for the first 4 weeks. So here it's quite far away, is resting, working, recovery 1, recovery 2, recovery 3. What this means is, this is probably like 1 minute after exercise is finished, 2 minutes after exercise is finished, and 3 minutes. So you can see how his heart rate is slowing down. So we've got resting heart rate, his working heart rate, recovery 1, 2, and 3. Which one of the heart rates in the figure is most likely to represent Luke's heart rate during his first training session? So we've got this black line here, which is A, B is the purple line, then it goes green is C, and D is the red one.
Is A any different because it's a thick black line, or is that just...
No, it's just another, I think, run out colours. So don't, it might be that they've tricked you to try and get you to look at the one that's different, but it's not as the odd one out. It's during his first training session. So would his working heart rate, think about it, be highest or lowest during his first training session?
high?
Could be lower because I don't know.
Because he may not be working as hard.
Yeah.
Because it may be his first time doing it.
This is hard because next lesson it will make it easier. When you
It's hard to know when you don't know that much about the actual thing.
Yeah. When you get better at exercise, your heart rate your heart rate might not be so high because you can get more blood in per beat.
But
So
he also might not have as much of a difficult exercise if it's his first week.
well, exercises will stay the same. He'll get better at doing them. So more than likely, this one would be D.
because he'd be struggling for his first week. He'd really struggle to do that exercise, so his heart rate would be the highest.
What questions is it?
4.
Yeah, ignore the questions that they say it is, because I've had to skip ones where we haven't covered it at all. Okay. Longer question. D. Sorry.
Sorry, my fault.
So 1 mark and a 2 mark, so you've got an A and B. This picture shows the movement and gases in and out of the capillary, so it's got O2 going to here and CO2 going in. So it's O2 coming out of the capillary, CO2 going into it. That's really important. Using figure 3, state where this gas exchange is taking place.
It begins with A, yeah.
Careful. Look at the movement of O2 and CO2. Is O2 going into the capillary or out of the capillary? Look here. So you're looking at this figure, not what's in your head. It's going out. O2, CO2. If O2 was going in, it would be in the alveoli. But this shows the O2 leaving. So it's going to be at the... So this is the capillary. Where is that capillary? Where? At the muscle. So that would be very quick for most people to write alveoli there. So it's giving you this figure on purpose. Always look at their drawing. Now it's asking you to state 2 reasons why gas exchange is important in a long tennis match. So think about tennis. Tennis has got high powerful movements. It's got lots of running. It's over a long period of time. There's breaks in between each rally. So you might have, when they call time, it might be just in between the serve. They've got that little resting time. Why is gases exchange? And it's 2 marks, so it must need 2 reasons why gas exchange is important. So it might be 1 reason about both of these, so 1 each. It might be 2 about one of them. Can you think of 2 marks? State 2 reasons why gas exchange is important in a long tennis match. So why do we need gas exchange in a long tennis match? Give it a go, see if you can get 2 marks, then we'll look at the mark scheme for this one. It's not easy. But when you look at the mark scheme, you're like, oh yeah, I do know that. Think about oxygen first. Why is it really important that gas exchange takes place at the muscle? Think about oxygen, why is it important? Now see if you can put it into words. What's oxygen needed for? We also looked at oxygen earlier, why aerobic respiration has 2 reasons, and what oxygen is good for 2 things. It could be you talk about those 2 things. It's needed to create something and it's needed to break something. That should be a massive clue. Anyone feel confident to give me 1 reason? Go on then, Jemima.
You need the oxygen to break down lactic acid.
Good, so to prevent the build-up of lactic acid during the match, we need it to break it down. What else is oxygen needed for?
Energy.
Yeah, to create energy, aerobic respiration. During a tennis match, it's told you it's a long tennis match. That's not 1 aerobic, it's got to be aerobic, it's told you it's long on purpose. So we'll also need it for that. So the mark schemes.
So basically the people that make the questions are like, oh, we're going to trick this person.
You need to make sure, always double read the questions. And I know when I did exams, I used to hate going back and reading my answers. But you need to actually slow down and read it. Because like on that picture, you all probably would have said the alveoli, because that's what's in your head, it's where it takes place. And then because in your head it's already that answer, you don't look at the picture properly, because in your head that's the alveoli. So when you check it, you're like, yeah, that's still right. But you need to slow down and read that question and look at the picture and just double check. Did I choose that to read it like that, or have I actually read it properly?
How long are the exams?
Oh, I need to double check. It's about 1.5 hours. AQA is 1 hour and 12 minutes, so it's probably pretty similar. but it's got 2 9-mark questions in Excel, so when we get enough content, we'll start looking at long answer questions.
Sorry, thank you.
That's right. So you got 1 mark for at the muscle tissues, we all got that. So you could have had any of these, or it says any appropriate response. If you write something that's not on the mark scheme, which I agree with, that the textbook has taught us, and it is right, you'll also get the mark. So point 1, you need oxygen for energy production to sustain long rallies or the game. So we've spoke about that, or if you spoke about aerobic respiration to create energy. You need to remove the additional carbon dioxide generated through playing tennis so that it can be breathed out. So you might have spoke about the carbon dioxide. Or you need the additional oxygen so that the player does not need to rely on the anaerobic energy system production. Or we could have talked about lactic acid. Or we need the oxygen during the match to prevent the build-up of lactic acid. Okay, next question. Okay, figure 4 shows a rugby player about to pass the ball. Examine the 2 ways, or not the 2 ways, examine 2 ways the skeletal system makes it possible for the rugby player to move into the position shown to pass the ball. So you need to think about the 5 functions of the skeleton. We've had a question like this already in the first lesson, I think it was. 2 of those will be relevant to help her pass the ball. Which 2? But you need to kind of explain why it's relevant, to link it to the rugby player. So it says 2 ways the skeletal system makes it possible for the rugby player to move into the position shown. So how does the skeletal system allow her to get into that position?
That's fine then.
Okay, but that's not a function of the skeletal system.
So it's
That's
movement?
not helping you, it's an exam question.
Yeah.
Try to do it first and then we'll discuss it.
Is it about the the actual bone?
My
or is it
big,
muscle?
no, skeletal system. So my big skeleton amazes people. It's got to be 2 of those 5 functions of the skeleton that's relevant. Selene tried to help you out a second ago, but he's not going to help anymore, are you? It was in question 1 of your homework as well. You wrote 1 of them. So that's your clue. My big skeleton amazes people. 2 of those is relevant to this question. Which 2 help her move into that position? Because maybe blood cell production doesn't actually help her move into that position. So which 2 do help her? But it says examine 2, so it doesn't just want you to write down it, it wants you to tell me how that helps do this.
I forgot what the P is. Oh yeah, thanks.
So protection is important for rugby, but is it important to help her to get into that position to pass the ball? Probably not. So it can't be protection. I wouldn't say blood cell production is important. Storage. So it must be these 2. So then we've got to somehow link those 2 to her. I'll give you 1 more minute.
I've got them, but I don't know like why it helps it.
Yeah, I know which 2 it is.
Yeah.
We're talking about movement. How does it help her move into that position?
By getting her body into the right place.
Okay, but tell me how that specific, on each one of those, how those 2 specifically, so you'll say you said movement, how does the skeleton move? What is it about the skeleton that provides movement to allow her to get into that position? What is it about the skeleton, what is it about attachment that allows her to get into that position? Does that make sense? Let's go on. So for B, it says white blood cells are produced by the skeletal system. So we're on to a different function skeleton now. Explain using an example why white blood cell production is important for the rugby player. So why is white blood cells important now? Pop it down and then we look at the mark scheme. So what is it about her, the white blood cells, that will improve her ability to play rugby or allow her to be safe while playing rugby maybe? You wasn't here for this one, was you? Don't worry about this one. Just
I don't know if I
I think I know it, but I don't have them right.
We'll look at the mark scheme after. might be a short amount of time for that one because no one knows on that one. Okay, mark scheme for 3A. So we needed to choose any two from here. So it's giving you 3 examples, but we need 2. So in order to achieve this position, the rugby player needs to be able to flex her knees. So she was in this position. So they got 1 point for identifying the fact that her knees were flexed. This is only possible due to the type of joint formed at the knee. So the type of joint, so we're talking about joints now. Because of the arrangement of the bones, the joint can flex, allowing the player to adopt this crouch position. You need quite a lot of information on that question, don't you? Because it's a 6-mark answer. Did you notice? Oh, sorry, I've gone forward into the back. Did you notice it has 6 marks? So it needs 6 points.
They fade it as well, they're cheeky.
We need to make sure that we get all of the information we can from that question. So we had 3 points we could have got from this one. This is the movement one here. The player needs to be able to move her skeleton to achieve this shape. So referred to movement, that's 1 point. For example, the player can move her arms to prepare to throw because the bones provide sites for the muscle attachment. Let's look at another function. So when the muscles contract, they pull on the bones of the lower arm, allowing flexion at the elbow. So all this question is teaching us, we know all of this information, but we might not have known to write all of this information. We might not have known this was relevant. So they wanted, because they've looked at what position she's in and how she got into that position, that's meaning that you need to look at the skeletal system, how it allows for it, but also how the muscular system links to the skeleton and what type of position and movement she's in at that point. So they've kind of got everything we've learned so far put into one question. Your only clue to know that you need to write that information is the 6-mark point. If it had 4 marks, probably.
So basically, depending on like how many marks you need for the question, depending on how many answers they want, you need to distribute the specific words or things you'll reference to so that they can give you the mark.
Yeah. So 6 marks means you need to make 6 points. But because you don't always know if your points are correct, I'd maybe go for 8, 9 points to hope that the 6 are covered and you get full marks. Obviously, if you don't know 8 or 9 marks, then don't. But if you've got more information,
Don't just be like, let's just put in some rubbish to see.
No, but always make sure it's relevant 9 marks. Don't just go on, because the examiner will just get bored and not even want to mark it. So be concise with your answer. Last bit we could have got, the rugby player needs to be able to hold her body weight to achieve this position to form a stable base. We've not looked at that. That's the definition of balance. We've not got there yet. This is possible due to the short bones of the foot. Their structure means that they are strong enough to ensure that the bones are not damaged during the game. This area I wouldn't expect you to write. We've not looked at these bits yet. But these bits we've looked at more, so we could have talked about the joints, the position of the muscles that she's in, how the muscles attach to the bones to allow for movement, how the fact that the knee joint is a hinge joint allows for flexion extension. You might even talk about how the agonist attached to a pull on the bone. So it's just breaking it down that little bit further. Okay, so for 3B, where you get your marks from, so white blood cells help fight infection. So you got your 1 mark. It was only a 3 marker, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So we got 1. For example, during a rugby tackle, a player may receive a cut that causes a risk of infection. So what this question is asking you to do is kind of use more common sense. So you know white blood cells fight infection or disease.
Yeah.
We don't look at the fact, but when you get cut in rugby, which you might do, or when you get cut in football, that's not going to be in the specification. It's kind of drawing on from your own experience and using knowledge from the textbook. So we know in a contact sport you might get cut.
Yeah.
When you have an open cut, there's a risk of infection. Therefore, white blood cells are needed to destroy the bacteria that enter the cut. So if we get cut in rugby, it increases the risk of infection. Because we're playing rugby, there's lots of mud and dirt around. Having that inside the cut will increase the risk of infection again, so we need to destroy it using the bacteria. So it's using a bit of knowledge and then a bit of common sense to support it. Other bits you could have got marks for, same point again, white blood cells help fight infection. For example, if a rugby player catches a cold, white blood cells try to destroy the germs from virus causing the cold. therefore increasing the health of the player so they can continue to train and play. Again, that's never
not
going to be
really
written in a
relevant.
textbook. But when you're playing football, if you're full of cold, how good are you playing football?
But I won't be as I won't play as well. I won't be as fast and stuff.
Yeah, and so then there'll be lots of questions in the exam. They tend to, in exams, use something that's just happened. So the year that the Olympics were in London, there would have been lots of questions about the Olympics, and they would have used the textbook of the specifications, stuff that you should know.
Was it in Russia last year? Or is
That
that
was
this
the
year?
World Cup. It was Russia.
Yeah, World Cup was Russia,
When was that?
just
Yeah.
being in the summer.
So it was this year. So I was right.
Yeah, this year. But not the Olympics, the World Cup, but you was right.
Where's the Olympics?
Like
It was
Tokyo.
Brazil
Yeah.
last time.
Because they did the big
Is it
Mario
Tokyo? I can't
thing.
remember.
Tokyo.
Is it Tokyo this time?
I think it's Tokyo.
In
It's
three
normally
They
years.
did the big Mario
Event
thing when they
there.
revealed it. They just had Mario.
Are they already
running.
preparing
Yeah, they've
for
already
it?
prepared it.
We will use Olympics a bit later on in the course, because Olympics is always a good sporting example to use when we talk about lots of the different topics that we'll go on to. But yeah, these questions, there'll be lots of questions where you use your common sense alongside the information. So don't be scared to write bits that you think is relevant just because you haven't read it from a textbook, because they will always say accept any other appropriate responses. So if your answer is correct because you've learnt it in another course, or from doing science, or from doing psychology, or from listening to a talk that you've listened to, or watching a documentary, if it's relevant and it's backed up by a scientific point that is in the text, you might still get that point. Just because I haven't told you about it doesn't mean you won't get a mark for it. Okay, I've got question 5, but it's probably question 8. Figure 6 shows the muscular system while running. So you've got A, B, C. So A, 2 marks, B, 1 mark. Careful here, 4 marks, and it's asking you to analyse. What does analyse mean?
Talk about everything that's going on in the area.
And how it's working and the impact. So it's a lot more detailed rather than just explain. So A, the muscle labelled in A is the, and when it contracts, and it's asking what movement it creates. So what muscle is A? What movement does it create? Then it's asking you which muscle works antagonistically with that muscle. So what's its pair? So it's the opposite. So this one's here. What's the opposite of it?
Wait, do you have to say what the other thing is?
Yeah.
In B.
Oh, sorry, I was on
So muscle A is the, what's it called? Glutes. And when it contracts, it does
Extension.
extension of the hip. So if the extension is one way, flexion must be the opposite. So the opposite muscle is the hip
Flexors.
flexors. Then the last bit, see if you can have a go at this on your own. Analyse the action of muscle B. So muscle B is here, shown in figure 6 to aid the performance. So it's got 4 marks. It will want to know what muscle it is, what movement it creates. You might get a mark, I've not looked at the mark scheme, the muscle it works with, and then how does that aid running? Because it's going to do this, isn't it, the arm? That's not actually moving my legs, but we have spoke about this and how that will support a runner. Try and make 4 points. When you're reading your answer, you want to think that. So what muscle it is, what movement it creates, what muscle it works alongside, how that movement it creates improves running or helps running. That should be 4.
I need to give up how it helps.
What am I doing? Why do I move my arms?
Generate speed to create
Speed and
momentum.
momentum. What's you going to say? Should we look at the mark scheme?
Yeah.
So, first one, the gluteus maximus. So make sure you use the full name. I often refer to it as the glutes, but try and stick to the full name, because I don't know what the examiners are like. You might get a nice examiner that says, yeah, that's right. You might get a horrible examiner that says, no, full name only. When it contracts, it extends the leg at the hip. Always refer to the joint that is moving. So it extends the leg at the hip. 1 mark for hip flexors. Now let's look at what we get. So you got 1 mark for saying it's the biceps. In figure 5, muscle B is contracted, so this is actually referred to the figure. Let's go back and look at the question.
Wait, that's really confusing me because it's talking about muscle B, but it's using the question that was from the question C.
It's all the same question, so it's A, B, C. So that diagrams for all of them.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, what was you?
So, if you go back to the thingy,
The mark scheme.
yeah, question C, it's talking about the triceps, yeah? Then if you go back,
No, biceps.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you go back,
It's talking about label B.
mm,
Where I don't
wait,
understand.
the question's not for each label.
No. Question C, analyse the action of muscle B.
Oh my god, I didn't see that.
Have you analysed C?
Yeah, I was analysing it for different ones.
That's fine. I'd prefer you to make mistakes here. And this is where we learn about exam
Sorry.
questions. So fine. It's fine. It's where we learn about it. So make loads of mistakes here. And then when it comes to exam, we don't make those mistakes. We want to make 100 mistakes, so we've made all of the mistakes we possibly can, so we don't find any new mistakes to make in the exam. So we've got 1 mark for saying it's a bicep. Then they've looked at the actual picture. So in figure 5, although I'm sure it's figure 6, muscle B is contracted, so the arm's like this. So as muscle B is contracted, allowing the arm to flex at the elbow. If you referred again to saying the biceps creates flexion at the elbow, you'd get that mark. This means that the runner can pump his arms to maintain control so he can run faster. So pumping your arms to create momentum to run faster is the same thing. If you talked about the bicep being the agonist, allowing it to contract, that would get you an extra mark. So they'd all be appropriate answers. Okay, homework for this week. On the next few slides, I've got some exams questions. I'm going to email you all of this and it'll be on Dropbox, so whichever way you prefer. I want you to complete the exam questions on the next few slides for homework. I'm happy for you just to do it by hand, use the questions and just write it by hand and give it in next week. I also want you to revise all that we've covered so far using the PowerPoint or the notes that you've got in your book or just the textbook, whichever way you prefer to revise. Because soon I'm going to do an assessment, because we've only got 1 more lesson left of this chapter and that's the whole chapter. And then we're moving on to biomechanics. So I want you to revise everything that we've done. Any bits where you think you're weaker on, go back, read over it. Because when I give you the assessment, although you're going to do it at home, I want you to sit it like an assessment so I can mark it and give you a grade that you would get if it was a real one. Just to show you the questions. So there's these 2 pages, these 2 pages, and this one here. Although that looks quite a lot, it's not actually that much. Some of them are really quick. Remember, look at the things. So this has only got a tiny bit of space here. It's 3 marks, so it's not asking for a 1-word answer. So look at all the clues. How many marks is it? What type of word is it? Is it asking you to refer to the picture? Because if it's asking you to refer to the picture, it wants you to refer to the movement he's doing or the position he's currently in. So if it's showing this picture, don't start talking about a football player because you won't get the marks for it. So just be careful, read those questions slowly and bring them for next lesson. And then next lesson we are going to look at the effects of exercise, the short-term and long-term effects, and then we're going to start looking at movement analysis. So that's the next chapter, that's the biomechanics. So what plane, what axes, how we move, how the joints work, and how the lever systems
Do
work.
we want to pre-read anything